Good afternoon or good morning. My name is Wendy Wills and I'm with the Office of State Human Resources. And I'd like to welcome you to our Lunch and Learn session today. As you know, Governor Cooper proclaimed June 2020 as LGBTQ Pride Month. And LGBTQ Pride Month celebrates the contributions that LGBTQ people have made to our society and across the state here in North Carolina. I am so pleased to be able to announce that today we will be having our Lunch and Learn session. And our Lunch and Learn session will be primarily conducted by Mandy Carter. And again, I'm pleased to have her as our keynote speaker for our Lunch and Learn. But before we do our Lunch and Learn session, we would like to bring Nancy A. Strike up so that she can introduce our speaker and also have any announcements that she has to give this morning. But before I do that, I would like to go over some housekeeping things with you. Please make sure that your phone is muted at all times as we are recording this session today, and make sure that your phone is on mute and that your video is turned off. We did get some questions from all of our participants prior to this session, but if you have some questions, please send those or submit those questions to our chat section. And if you want to know where that is located, you can find your chat icon and submit any questions that you have there. Again, continue to keep your phones on mute and your video off, and I'm going to turn the program over to Nancy A. Strike.
Hi, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Nancy A. Strike with the Office of State Human Resources, and we are just so pleased today to bring this presentation to you. We have been very fortunate to invite and have Ms. Carter accept our invitation to talk about LGBTQ Pride Month and some history associated with that. And I guess perhaps it was just really good planning on our part. But it just so happens that we also got a landmark U.S. Supreme Court decision related to discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity at the same time. So we are really in for a treat today as Ms. Carter talks about the history of the LGBT movement and the progression towards equality in society and all aspects of society, and also spend some time talking about why the U.S. Supreme Court decision last week was a landmark decision in so many ways, and some of the implications of that decision for the state of North Carolina and the nation as a whole. So I have an introduction from Ms. Carter, and I'm going to start there. Again, to reiterate what Wendy said, though, we're very pleased that you're here with us today. We're very much excited about this presentation and the opportunity to bring what really is a renowned speaker to the Office of State Human Resources and state government in general. So let me tell you a bit about Ms. Carter. Mandy Carter is one of the leading African-American lesbian activists in the country. She has a 43-year movement history of social, racial, and LGBTQ justice organizing beginning in 1968. Raised in 2 orphanages and a foster home in upstate New York for her first 18 years, Ms. Carter attributes the influence of the Quaker-based American Friends Service Committee, the former Institute for the Study of Nonviolence, and the pacifist-based War Resistance League to her long-sustained activism and staunch commitment to multiracial, multi-issue organizing. She was named the American Civil Liberties Union's North Carolina's 2011 Frank Porter Graham Award winner, and was also nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize as part of the 1,000 Women for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2005, intended to recognize, make visible, and celebrate the impressive and valuable, yet often invisible peace work of women around the world. Ms. Carter helped found 2 groundbreaking organizations. The first is Southerners on the New Ground, or SONG, S-O-N-G, which integrates work against homophobia into freedom struggles in the South. And the second is the National Black Justice Coalition, NBJC. NBJC was founded in 2003 and is the only current national civil rights organization of concerned Black, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender individuals and allies dedicated to fostering equality by ending racism and homophobia. In 2008, Ms. Carter was one of 5 national co-chairs of the Obama Pride, the LGBT grassroots infrastructure for Barack Obama's historic 2008 presidential campaign. She organized grassroots networks, especially of people of color throughout the South. She was also a member of Hillary Clinton's North Carolina LGBT steering committee. And in case that hasn't kept her busy enough, in 2012, she co-edited We Have Not Been Moved, Resisting Racism and Militarism in the 21st Century America, which Maya Angelou called, quote, so needed in this age and this climate of political posturing and posing, end quote. Ms. Carter served as a Resistance Studies Fellow at the Resistance Study Initiative at UMass Amherst, and she continues her activism, lending her voice wherever it is needed to uproot and eradicate injustices. So therefore, so many reasons, we are so honored today to have Ms. Carter with us and to talk to all our HR, EEO, and EO professionals throughout North Carolina state government as we work in collaboration to make North Carolina state government a fair and equitable workplace for all of our employees and for all North Carolinas and all North Carolinians in general. So with that, we will turn the platform over to Ms. Carter. Thanks very much.
With what happened with these 3 key Supreme Court decisions is critical. What I would like to do, and before I start, I want to thank you, Governor Cooper, Roy Cooper. I printed out the proclamation that he had proclaimed for LGBTQ Pride Month 2020 for North Carolina. But I also want to say thank you to the EEOC position in 2019, where I think you added the wording of non-discrimination based on sex, gender expression, and gender identity. And so what I thought I would do is just focus on that initial one, that June 15th one, that was really around the LGBTQ non-discrimination, talk a little bit about what the implications of those are, but also point out some of the things that we still need to deal with that have an impact specifically, I think, on all you all over there as well, and then talk a little bit about next steps. And we will leave some time for some Q&A as well. But I also want to point out that the timing of this decision, because the Supreme Court mainly comes down with these major decisions in the month of June, we have to remember another historic one in 2013, where Edie Windsor, a lesbian, was able to win a US Supreme Court decision based on the defense of marriage, where now across the entire country, anyone can be legally married of the same gender, same sex. So with that said, with that precedent happening across the state, across the country, but with this one, and I think this is what I'm going to highlight, I want to share, if you don't mind, we have an organization called Equality North Carolina. Like a lot of other states, we've been all watching for this decision. But there was something interesting that Kendra Johnson, who's our executive director, made a comment about. And I am not a lawyer. I had told Gina and Wendy that I'm a community activist. I really believe in how we kind of combine activism with the courts and public opinion and policy. But I want to share what she was saying, just to give you a sense of how that reaction means right down to our state of North Carolina. So Kendra Johnson says of Equality North Carolina, this is a win for the workplace. But what it doesn't do, it doesn't regulate healthcare, access to rental property, restrooms, healthcare settings, or credit. We still have our work cut out for us. And so when you think about the huge win and implications, and here's another piece of that ruling, is for employees with 15 or more employees. What if you happen to be a smaller business? So I think that a lot of groups and lawyers and other people are looking at this landmark decision, no doubt is really key. But what are the fine points and what are the fine tuning of this to figure out how do you address what's happening with these other particular rulings? So that's kind of like the what of it. The protecting of the LGBT employees from discrimination in the workplace based on another landmark U.S. Supreme Court decision of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Within that, Title VII, which specifically is going on the issue of sex, and then we also had the addition of race, color, religion, and national origin. So legally, it's a win. Societally, it's a win. My question to you and on this conversation we're having today, what do we do with it now going forward based on what we're now looking at? What are the exceptions that are happening to it? I would say that part of that conversation would be what we've been doing, some conversations with lawyers, community activists, and I would also take into account those who sit in the North Carolina General Assembly, those who sit in our city councils, so those who sit in the county commissioner seats, about how this is all getting down to very local and to where we live and where we work. We're looking at how we would talk about potential next steps. And when you think about next steps, if we pass it on the US Supreme Court decision, I don't know if you're aware of or should be, and we can have more conversation about that, but here in the state of North Carolina, in the year 2016, we introduced a thing called the State Equality for All Act within North Carolina. That has to get through the North Carolina General Assembly. You're sitting over there in Raleigh. You're right there in downtown Raleigh where we have to have that conversation. So if we pass it on the federal level, we now have to look how we can do it on the state level of North Carolina. Again, we're trying to pass the State Equality for All Act that was proposed in 2016, in which it would protect all North Carolinians in the civil rights, but in the basis of age, disability, marital status, familial status, or military or veteran status. That would help complement the other act that we're trying to get through the United States Congress right now, which is the Federal Equality Act that would pretty much do the same, but on a federal level. So to me, this is a huge win. It's a major step in the right direction, but we still need to then have the conversation is how does that work out practically within our state? And quite honestly, can I have this conversation? In 1967, when they passed that landmark Loving versus the state of Virginia, Richard Loving, white man, married to Mildred Jeter, Black woman, they passed that law in 1967. The question was who was going to abide by it, who would be willing to make sure that I might not approve of this or not, but we know that it's on the books. That was in 1967. I graduated high school in 1966. So I don't know who's on this call, but if anyone is within that kind of a post-World War II baby boomer ages, born between 46 and 64, for that to happen in 1967, but in now 2020. And I would say to you, in our lifetime, our first African-American president, Barack Obama, who's the son of an interracial marriage, who became the first African-American president of this country. Anything is possible. Anything is possible. Then how do we collectively have that conversation about how we move it forward? So I would say, kind of giving those kind of big picture, kind of pieces that I would like to share with you before we get into the Q&A. I want to also maybe highlight a couple of other things that are really important. When I have been honored to help co-found the National Black Justice Coalition in 2003. When we introduced the idea of the National Black Justice Coalition in 2003, we had a press conference at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. Only one reporter from the Washington Post showed up. One reporter. I oftentimes mention about the lesson that I learned from Jack Hickey, my social studies teacher, talked about the Quakers and the power of one. One reporter showed up at that press conference. The next day, we got a call from Julian Bond. Julian Bond, the first Black to integrate and or to have a seat in the Georgia State House, the president of the NAACP called and said these words, "What can I do to help?" So the legacy in the history of the National Black Justice Coalition, partnering with the National NAACP, and in the year 2009, on the 100th anniversary of the NAACP, they formed the first ever national LGBTQ task force with the NAACP. History was made again. But why did it take 100 years? But here we sit. And then with the other organizations, the Southerners on New Ground, founded in Durham, North Carolina in 1993, and Equality North Carolina is now in its 40th year, founded in 1979. So I just want to kind of give that big picture in terms of how I would explain and how we're looking at particularly this issue of non-discrimination. I would also just like to maybe point out, before we get into any question, I think another piece that I would like to share with you, and it's kind of personal. The fact that I was raised in 2 orphanages and a foster home in upstate New York. I was born in 1948. Having to go through that system, through the welfare system, through this social workers, pretty much out of State University of New York, Albany. To be raised in that place, and I don't know what the current situation is in North Carolina now, but one of the key things that I thought was really instrumental is that they mainstreamed us into the public school system. Mount Pleasant High School, I graduated in 1966. The fact that a social studies teacher could bring someone in from a group like the American Friends Service Committee, which is a predominantly white peace organization. I think they had a question that we're going to address with this today. How do we, as a white ally organization, figure out the role that we can play in at that time of the Black civil rights movement of the early 1960s? And for them to make a commitment too about how they would do that, about the idea of teaching people like me to become organizers, but it was the people they also had contact with. And one of the most important things, in addition to talking about the power of one, the importance of equality and justice for all, they had a work camp in the Pocono Mountains, and I went when I was a junior in high school. And there was a white folk singing couple from the Highlander Center, which is in Tennessee, highlander.org. Guy and Candy Carowin came, and this is one of those amazing moments of just how someone can touch you and impact you. Guy and Candy Carowin were the era of Joan Baez, Bob Dylan, Judy Collins, all the songs that were happening during that time, during the civil rights movement. And they said that the way they thought they could participate as white allies, they called themselves cultural workers. They said, we're going to take a tape recorder and we're going to go down into the South, Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, and we're going to record the freedom songs and the freedom meetings in those Black churches. Those tapes are now at the Smithsonian Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. And one of the people they bumped into that was with the Freedom Singers was Bernice Johnson Reagan, who founded what? Sweet Honey in the Rock. So you think about these connections and the opportunities in terms of what that could, impact our lives. But I think the other important thing is something that I didn't really think about earlier. I have no parents. So for me coming out, I didn't have to have that issue of coming out to family. It's another issue coming out in the workplace, but not having to deal with that, which really means in one way, in a really important way. When we founded NBJC, we thought it was really important for this. For those of us who can be out, for those of us who can be visible, it's critical because we become the faces and the voices for those who cannot be seen or not heard. And it also means that when we partner with the NAACP, the National Council of Negro Women, the National Urban League, where there is now a buy-in and an understanding, equality and justice for all means exactly that. And how do we partner and move forward in terms of how we move forward in terms of how that conversation might happen? And I was born in Albany. I lived in San Francisco, California for many years with the War Resisters League in LA. But in 1982, I said, I want to get back home because I missed the Four Seasons. And I said, I'll take any job east of the Mississippi. And the one job that was open for me in Durham, North Carolina was the War Resisters League. and that was in 1982. I'm still here. And being a part of this conversation is a great way to figure out how do we move forward from here now. I think I'll end on that note, if that's okay. I think I want to just say before we get into the Q&A, one of the things that kind of helps me get through day to day, especially here in this COVID time of COVID-19, I remember thinking that this notion about how does change happen? And I remember thinking of this great quote about, I'm not a lawyer, I'm an activist, whatever, but how the changing of hearts and minds and the changing of public policy, how those sometimes are combined to make the change in which we want to see. So when you think about Edie Windsor case in 2013, when you think about Loving versus the state of Virginia, interracial marriage in 1967, when you think about Obama women winning in 2008, but some of those Supreme Court decisions happened where in the South, and how incredibly important that is. And I will tell you this is me and all of my hope and aspirations. I think we're not living in the world of if, I think we're living in the world of when. And for us to be a part of this conversation and how we move forward from here will be an important one. Good enough to start with? All right. I think we're going to maybe go to, yeah, turn it over to Gina or Wendy.
Oh, you ready for your questions?
Yeah,
Okay.
I wanted to make sure we left a little bit more time for that, because I think, Nancy, thanks to your wonderful introduction and what the graphic is, everyone kind of knows who I am. So we might want to get into some conversation here about what next and implications, and particularly for y'all over there as well. What do we do now?
Okay, well, I did get some questions in today and a few earlier this week. So I will go ahead and ask you one that's right at the top of the list, and it actually matches with a couple of questions that were already on my list from earlier. Can you tell us a little bit more about the cases themselves, the Supreme Court cases, and what issues were involved?
Yeah, I think, and as someone who doesn't really normally follow the Supreme Court case, and I think when you think about activism, but I think anyone who's doing the kind of work that you're doing where you are, if you have a policy and it passes, who gets to implement that day to day in terms of city or county? I think for me personally, and I actually have the book, in 1967, I don't know if you can see that, but it's a book called Loving versus the State of Virginia. And that case really had to do with what was happening in a lot of other states. In fact, it's almost parallel to what happens with the gay and lesbian community right now. You'll have some states, like the state of Massachusetts, for instance, was the first state that their state Supreme Court unanimously agreed that you could do marriage equality, not gay marriage, marriage equality between same-sex couples. That was a decision that happened in Massachusetts. The similar would be interracial marriage in different other states, but when you get down to the South, it was not allowed. Not only was it not allowed, but we saw some instances of pretty much violence and or a really big pushback on the idea that interracial marriage would happen. But then here comes the question, how do you make sure that that can change? Not because you have anyone living around you, whatever, but it has to go through the courts. So for the American Civil Liberties Union to take on that case, I am not a lawyer, but if someone told me that the name of the case that would once and for all solve the issue of interracial marriage was called Loving versus the state of Virginia, Loving, Richard Loving, white man married to Mildred Jeter, black woman. And you know the logo for Virginia is for all lovers. That case happened, and little background, when they went before the court, they got arrested, and the judge said, if you promise to leave the state of Virginia for 25 years, we'll let this go. And they said no. That's when they went ahead and had the conversation and got ACLU involved. And so when they won that case, can I just say to you, I doubt if the next morning everyone woke up and went, well, sure, what were we thinking? No, you had still major opposition, but it's on the books. But I also think that maybe there's an underestimating of something else that we have to talk a little bit about, the power of love. I think oftentimes the amount of money, the amount of time that is expended on trying to disenfranchise people of color, disenfranchise women, disenfranchise the LGBTQ community, sometimes they underestimate the power of love. And PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, that started way early on, has to be a perfect example, in my opinion. And we have chapters all across the state and across the country where they said, that's my lesbian daughter, that's my gay son, that's my transgender child. And so that hearts and mind part comes into play. So that Loving versus the state of Virginia plays that role, but also, oftentimes the court case that decides that could also then have implications for other cases that come after it. So for this one that happened on June 15th, if you think about it, they went back to the 1964 Civil Rights Act that we had to fight for, essentially as a civil rights movement, Black civil rights movement, but they took out that section about sex, about this discriminating on sex. But what if we hadn't had that law? And can I just make an observation as well? Edie Windsor won big in 2013. That same Supreme Court all but gutted the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And so for those of us who live as people of color, LGBTQ, whatever, you wonder sometimes when these decisions are being made, how do they impact day to day? So I would say to you that the Loving case, Civil Rights Act of 1964, 1965, and what we had happen June 15th, they're all kind of tied together. And I would turn it back over to you who are sitting on this call. What does that mean for your day-to-day operations? How do you operate city, county, state, and how that's going to look going forward in partnership with ACLU, Equality North Carolina, the NAACP, other groups that are here in the state? I hope that would help a little bit with answering that question.
Yes, and if you can share more information, excuse me, my voice is trying to leave me, share more information about those specific cases in this latest ruling, but also if you can explain why this U.S. Supreme Court decision is so significant for the LGBTQ community.
Well, what I'll make sure I'll do, and Nancy, and I'll put some link-ins, but also if you just Google Loving versus the state of Virginia or Edie Windsor, I'll put some links in, then I'll be able to share, and you can get that to everyone who wants on the call. When I say, I don't know how to explain it. I'm sitting here thinking, in fact, behind me, I have a picture of Obama Pride, and I have a bag that we had at the Stonewall Inn. And remember, the reason why you even have Pride Month is because of what happened with the Stonewall Inn, June 28th, 1969. It's almost as if we go about our daily business trying to live our lives just as we like to be, whether it's people of color or women, LGBTQ, naming any demographic in the country. But at some point, if you have organizations or efforts to specifically make sure that you never get the right to vote, you never get the right to have a job. Remember, when these lands were settled, women were not allowed to vote or run for public office. Black folk came as property. And we had to finally do all the organizing to finally get to the point of where we're US citizens as well. But then we were told exactly what they said to women: you cannot vote, you cannot run for office, you cannot serve in the military, and marriage was anything but equal. So do you see a pattern here? And by default, who does that leave? But demographics are shifting now. I think I was mentioning, I think by 2020, by 2050, if not sooner, this country will be majority people of color, keeping in mind who is already here. And if that's the trajectory of our demographic and what's going to happen countrywide, North Carolina is the 9th largest populated state. And sometimes what happens here in this state has a lot of implications for other states to follow. For instance, Durham County, where I live, was one of the first counties to allow domestic partnership benefits. Durham County was the first to say that you can have and even some college campuses would say domestic partnership benefits. Other counties would say, well, if Durham County did that, can we replicate that? So again, not being a lawyer, but really based more on civic engagement, community organizing. Even now, as we have this conversation, what are the other laws that are happening with other members of our population? 1 in 10 people is Latinx in the state of North Carolina now. So if you want to get a look at those cases, I'll put some links in: Loving versus the state of Virginia, 64 Civil Rights Act in 65, and also the Edie Windsor case. But I would say that would be a great place to start. And I would ask one question quick for anyone who's on this call that works where you are. What inspired you? Why are you doing this work? I know what planted my seed. And I was sitting here thinking, if you did a go around and saying, why am I doing this particular work at this particular time? Nancy, I would say, why this for you? And who inspired you or what? And what do you want to do with it? And how do you figure out how that can kind of balance out against all the other efforts happening across the state in all 100 counties? And just to have that sharing about that, what that really means. That's what I would say.
You mentioned universities, and I know you've worked with universities in the UNC system specifically, but several beyond that. But can you share your thoughts on the work those institutions are doing around LGBT issues, especially UNC system institutions?
Well, one of the good things that I would say in response to that, North Carolina has 11 historically Black colleges and universities. They're known as HBCUs. We have 11 of them. Here in Durham, we have North Carolina Central University. So I'll start there. And some of them have direct relationships with the University of North Carolina system. Because they wanted to form an LGBT student organization. And oftentimes they would have a hard time finding a faculty advisor who would be the one you would have to have in order to set up. You have NC State right there where you are. That has one of the longest running ones. But for North Carolina Central University, historically Black college and university, they had a difficulty because you had some teachers basically saying religion, I can understand this, that was something they didn't feel like could be comfortable with. But some were going like this, well, I don't want anyone to think I'm gay. Well, what message is that sending to the students? But fortunately, you have professors and teachers that would step up. And I have to put out the name of Tia Marie Doxey, an ally at Central. She was really key, and David Jolly, white gay man, who were instrumental in helping to get that group going at North Carolina Central called Colors. They just had their 5th Lavender graduation. But you have things at Bennett College in Greensboro, another HBCU, things at North Carolina A&T over there in Greensboro, Shaw University in Raleigh. So that's the HBCUs, but that took a lot of conversation with the National Black Justice Coalition, with allies, and how each campus would work. The uniqueness of UNC Chapel Hill and the UNC system with all theirs, only because of a combination of student activism, faculty involvement, they said any new structures going up on any of the campuses, and we can double check on this, but any new camp building going up has to have at least one single stall, gender neutral bathroom. That's a game changer. And if that's the policy, because if you have any LGBT or students who don't feel comfortable going into a bathroom for whatever reason, then you know that you have the safety of knowing that there's a place that you can go. And they actually started doing little diagrams of where the building would be located, the floor, or whatever. But that would be important. And that took a lot of work from allies as well. So within the UNC school system, that's a model for how other states might replicate it. Other four-year schools, technical schools, community colleges. So that would be the best example I could share, Gina, in terms of how that's happened on that campus. And can I also say another piece that would be important is that there's a wonderful graphic I think people created where there's what they call a safe space. So that if you're an advisor or if you're on a campus and you can put that on your door, or people would know it in the website or links, they would know that they have a safe place that they can come have that conversation, that they're not alone, particularly if they don't have an organization. So a lot of that is just infrastructure, and a lot of that is alumni. I used to be an LGBT student at UNC, or name me a campus, and I'm here to be a part of the infrastructure to help with anything you might need in terms of your support. But that campus infrastructure is real key in how they make those policy campus by campus. So UNC, thank you. And also for the HBCUs that are out there making a difference as well. That's what I would say.
Okay. And shifting from universities to the workplace, I know that many people are unsure of how to address folks, which pronouns to use. And I want to know from you, how would you advise managers and supervisors specifically to address that topic with their employees in advance so that their employees are aware, confident, informed, and not back second guessing or keeping silent because they're unsure, but that they feel confident in dealing with that in the workplace and ensuring that LGBT staff are respected. So how would you advise managers, supervisors, and also what other advice would you specifically give to managers, supervisors, and leadership as
Mm-hmm.
far as ensuring that the workplace is safe and inclusive for all LGBT staff?
Perfectly important question. I would say to you, and this is interesting. One, I had mentioned earlier, I don't know if you are familiar with this term of employee research groups, ERGs.
Yes.
And I know that in the state of North Carolina, particularly here in the Triangle area, you have a lot of businesses that created these because they want to get the best talent coming in. They want to keep them, they want to retain them. And a lot of times it would be the company. For instance, I want to show you like Food Lion. Can you see that? You see that fan? Food Lion was one of the first companies that was saying they were going to form not only an employee research group, but they wanted to make sure that people were aware that Food Lion is really in support of LGBTQ employees. So that would mean protecting their rights on the job, how that might work out in each of the individual stores across the country for Food Lion to stand up and make that decision. Same thing with Wells Fargo Bank, Bank of America, name me some others. But I would say to you, and this is it's almost a little easy to answer, but you might want to ask, how do you self-identify? So I think it's a two-part. If you have a policy and you have it written down that we welcome, and you name out the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, however those words are defined, and we are going to tell you that you are welcome here, not only just in terms of who you are as a person, but here are the specific policies that could underscore and underline what that means. But I would say to you that if you were to say, well, and especially if it's a new person coming in and you're asking if they're coming in to join the job, and is that something that gets asked of them in the beginning, or if they will tell you up front? But if you ask how you self-identify, then they're going to tell you how their pronouns, whether they want to use lesbian, gay, but I think that's the most easiest way. But I don't know if you've seen these little buttons that are going around now. You know how you have gender pronouns? It's like she, her, hers, he, his, him, they, their, thems. But also I like the one as you all means y'all. And sometimes it's something that you put on, but I think with internally, I'd just be curious, even within where you are there, whether you have any policy on that. And if it is something you wrote up, or is it something that's statewide? Is it county by county, city by city? But I would say that asking that simple question would be really one important one. And also exploring the notion of these employee research groups. There's a national organization called, I'll put the link in, but it's a national organization that specifically works with any corporation, any business that wants to be inclusive in how they can do policy, the day-to-day. For instance, if I'm a lesbian and I'm working at a particular company, am I allowed to put the picture up of the person that I either am married to or who my partner is? What if you can't? Why? And what about bathrooms? What about the policy if you're having a meeting? I mean, it goes into each of the individual, your day-to-day, if you were to think about how that would be. So some of it is just personal. Someone's an ally, someone's a friend, someone identifies. And most importantly, if someone can be out, and now you can be out, especially if you're a business of 15 or more, you can be visible. What are the proactive things that I would almost ask people on this call that one could do, or should do? And again, Equality North Carolina would be good for this. You have the North Carolina Black Alliance that works with Black businesses. That's also out and around. You have a disability rights statewide network that includes LGBT inclusive. So Gina, I would say that you already have some things happening right there. The question would be how to be putting in contact with them. And then honestly, having conversation, one-on-ones, community conversation. Is there a way people can be on an internet, or a question if you need to have some privacy or security in that way? But I think just starting it and getting the ball rolling, now we have a good reason why we can and should.
Okay, you mentioned the court ruling and that it applies to organizations that have 15 or more employees. So those organizations that have less, those LGBT staff are still going to face discrimination. But
Right.
since this is a step in the right direction,
Mm-hmm.
and it says a lot about what we considered to be a very conservative court. What do you think this next step would be? What does this ruling predict for the future of future LGBT Supreme Court rulings? And how is this going to help move forward to other equality issues that members of the LGBT community face?
Good question. I think something we might want to look at, and this really gets into how are judges appointed or how are judges picked? Here in the state of North Carolina, I live in Durham County. Not all judges are there for lifetime. If someone, I mean, you actually have judges running right now for these court positions. So if you think about if activist organizing can create a need or a want for a particular law, whether it's city, county, state, one of the House districts or the Senate districts in the state of North Carolina, ultimately that's going to come before a judge. But you start way down at the, the county judges, the state judges, the federal, a number of them are elected and or appointed. That might mean that we might want to know who these judges are and what their positions are. So that would be something I would say, practically speaking, be aware. I live in Durham. I work in Precinct 8. I cannot tell you when I go down there as a poll worker, when it comes to judges, people, I don't know these people. I don't know who they are. And oftentimes that's the most overlooked piece of how important those races are. So to become self-educated about the judges in your community would be something good. And Equality does that. Some other organizations do it well. I would say to you, a landmark in terms of a win was Anita Earls. Anita Earls, Black, just got going into North Carolina State Supreme Court. Sherry Beasley, the first ever Black State Supreme Court justice here in the state of North Carolina. Some of these positions are short term, some are longer, but the more you move up, oftentimes those cases are based, quite honestly, dating back to what happens on a city, county, or state level, city, county, or state. So that would behoove us to have that information. So groups like the ACLU, groups like the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, groups like North Carolina Organizing for Women, the NAACP, they do recommendations. We have elections coming up November 3rd. We can't tell you who to vote for. We can tell you what the records are, but judges are just as critical as your city council, who represents your mayors, whatever. I would say that that would be part of that conversation and where you can look to get that info. But judges matter. And also, can I also make another interesting point? I want to go back to what I said about sometimes you get a law passed because it's just the right thing to do. And there may or may not want to be people who want to be in compliance of the law or they don't like it, but the law is on the books. Virginia Tyler, Black woman in Virginia, was the one who challenged the Jim Crow laws of back of the bus. She challenged that and she won in the US Supreme Court. What if she decided it wasn't worth it, it wouldn't make a difference, but that's on the books. And then you have the freedom riots that had to happen. And now I think you have students who think, I never even knew that law existed. I can go anywhere I want, ride anywhere I want. And also part two of that, those blue ADA signs, the blue wheelchair accessible, that had to happen because of a movement, the American Disability Rights Act. So activism, community activism, civic engagement, win it in the courts go into the higher Supreme Court, and it comes right back out to all the rest of us in our day-to-day lives. But it starts with each one of us, the power of one, and how we decide to do that work, where we live, where we are.
Okay. Thinking of that power of one and also organizing, groups organizing, what issues do you see as next to address to bring equality to members of the LGBT community? We have this recent win. What's coming down the pike as far as this is what we're going to focus on next, or what do you feel should be the next one? There are many.
Yeah, I forgot one thing. I wanted to double back about this thing about bathrooms. I was sitting here thinking, how many of us have either been on a plane or a train? Probably in 80% of homes, what are those bathrooms? They're gender neutral bathrooms. I was sitting here when our General Assembly passed that bathroom bill, I don't know, a few years ago. And when they all either got on a train or a plane to go home, they were going into gender neutral bathrooms. So it's not as if that's not something that we're all aware of every day, but sometimes it's about the language, sometimes it's about people's perception and the term gender neutral. I only share that because we're already doing a lot of this stuff already. And it's just a question of how people perceive it. But also, it's also just about how we become allies in terms of the issue. So I just wanted to make that little interesting point about gender neutral bathrooms and also small businesses. I live here in Durham. I go down to the Durham Co-op. Some people don't have a male female bathroom, they just have one. A lot of you have experienced that. So it's not as if it's not already happening. I would say in terms of next steps, I want to go back to what I said earlier. The fact that we are trying to pass in the state of North Carolina, what's this thing I said? It's called the State Equality for All Act. That would mean that what happened on the Supreme Court level, and even though it's for businesses 15 or more, that would actually mean for any business, it doesn't matter, small or, you know, whatever it might be. So the idea of having some conversation about organizing some civic engagement, education, to figure out how we can all be a part of this North Carolina State Equality for All Act on the state level. They're trying to replicate this in other parts of the country as well, Gina. But then that gets back to the federal Equality Act that would also then protect on all the people that have not been, covered by this most recent ruling. And I must say that a lot of that has to do with who's sitting in Congress, who's sitting in the state legislature, who's sitting in city hall and county, small towns. And I think that's part of our job, is to figure out this community activism, employment research groups, and how we can have that practical conversation and how things can change. And I would also say to you, if you have not done this yet, please do the census for 2020. That's the next 10 years of the money that will come into the particular state of North Carolina. That's key. That also has a lot to do with what the district lines are drawn, the congressional district lines and the state lines and county lines, I would say. Can't get into much detail without getting specifics about, you know, every county, every city, but I think that would be kind of the bigger picture. But that also has a lot to do with your organization, your group, and what you do over there in Raleigh. And the notion that you have the Office of State Resources and how that might be able to, can we partner in some of that or not? Can there be conversation? How that might also happen? And can I also say it has to also be in not just English. There's a whole idea of 1 of every 10 people in the state is Latinx. So in Spanish, whether you have an ASL interpretation, I think there's other aspects of how you make this accessible for people, that if they want to either get to know about it, what they can do once they know about it, and how they can stay engaged. But once again, knowledge makes power, the importance of how we can organize and work together. And with those 3 organizations that you saw on the screen, SONG, Equality North Carolina, and the National Black Justice Coalition, in addition to others, would be a good place to start.
Okay. So you've been doing this for a long time, as you've already stated. So what's next for you? I know activism is always going to be a part of your life, but what are your next steps and what are you looking forward to? I personally think you should write a book about your history. You shared some, but there's so much more to what you've experienced and the work you've done. But what do you have in front of you?
Well, a couple of things I would share, and I would put this out to everyone on this call, and I hope we can do a part 2 or 3 of this at some point too. I love doing this, and I was a little scared and nervous about this thing. People get paid to do the work. I get paid right now full time to do this organizing, because you have foundations, you have funders who want to figure out how can we make sure people can free up their time in order to do this work. So my 53 years of organizing, the first 2 or 3 were basically, I think my first job was in 1969, Gina, and I was paid $80 a month. Home was the couch in the office in San Francisco, and I loved it. That ain't happening now at 71. But I'm thinking also, if you were to think about any profession, I think you have social workers, you have foster care, whatever the area of work that needs to be done. I would say to you, it's not always like, frontline LGBTQ or people of color or disability rights, but what's good is that every one of those segments, in fact, I would say to you real quick, I'm watching the clock, if you were to go 10,000 feet high, and this is me, and I'm in it for the long haul. If you were to ask the question, who else needs to be a part of the coalition of change? The coalition of change. Clean air, clean water. No one should be hungry. No one should be homeless. Everyone should have access to an education. Everyone should have access to health care. And you can make that long laundry list. But we never can just do it all by ourselves. So by collectivizing and coordinating and collaborating with each other, whether it's in the civic organizations, government organizations, nonprofits, grassroots, that's how I think you start making change. And you think about it in terms of the state of North Carolina. And the fact that you have a governor that would issue an LGBT proclamation for Pride Month, extraordinary. That didn't happen before. So I would say to you that long haul organizing, and I would also say to you, intentional in terms of generation. I am 71. I want to be in rooms with those who are 17. And so you figure out where those meetings are happening. There's a lot of online stuff going on now. Southerners on New Ground, other groups, but intentionally showing up in each other's spaces. And I'll end with this real quick. If we, and this is the one I want to emphasize, I'm not sure if we realize the power of this, because you asked me. People don't know Mandy Carter, but let's say you had some friends, and you probably get this reaction sometimes, and even you, Wendy, or maybe Nancy. You know, the only reason I'm here is because you asked me, otherwise I wouldn't come. So I just wonder how humbly we don't figure out how that might be an invitation, an open invitation to have that conversation because you asked me. And also with the internet, and there's other ways people can be engaged. And also I would say, once this skin is over, I'm getting in my car. I got a RAV, and I want to drive county to county, do the old days of sitting around coffee and lunches and breakfasts, whatever, and having these one-on-one conversations with the folk who live in the state of North Carolina to talk about how we impact change. Again, I don't think it's if, it's a when, and how we can decide how we each can be a part of that, the power of one. And these conversations, I feel so humbled and honored that I can be a part of this today, and I hope I can come back and do it again, and ideally in person somewhere at some point. But that's what I would say, the power of one, and what we have the opportunities, what's being presented and what we take advantage of, I would think would be some things to ponder.
I remember, and we're getting close to our end time, but I remember a speech that you gave, well, a talk you gave, and you had dialogue, and someone asked a question, you know, I'm just one person, what can I do? And you just said the power of one, but something you added to that was just start the conversation. And you said that's for professors, that's for students, that's for business leaders, that's for managers, supervisors, the lady in the grocery store. Doesn't matter who you are. The action starts when you start the conversation. And I don't know if you can just for a couple of minutes expound on that, because we're all in places right now, we're siloed, but we're in places where we're reaching out, you know, virtually, but at some point we will be in an environment just to inspire people to step up and start that conversation, get around the discomfort of it or the uncertainty of it, and just do that. It was very powerful when you made that statement, and I remember the roaring round of applause. I don't remember all of the exact words you said, but
yeah.
it motivated a lot of people at this other institution, and I remember that very vividly.
Well, you basically said it. I think, you know, and I think part of it is also, I just wonder how often we underestimate who we are and what we do. I would also say to you, Gina, in addition to what you share and what you say, I know that I did not realize this, but oftentimes if you have someone, whether you're a person of color, LGBTQ, particularly this, but some people would never, ever, ever, when Central finally got their LGBT and Ally Center created, people said, I'm not going to go in there because people will be seeing me going in there. I don't know if I'll feel safe or comfortable, whatever. But the fact that they had other ways, because there's an internet, there's some conversation, or if you find a way to make sure that you have a safety, like a safe space where you can actually have that conversation. But here's the one that I would almost say to you, in addition to the power of one, the letter A. We do not win these without allies. The letter A, allies, whether that's an ally for being non-LGBT, a non-person of color. I'm a Black lesbian. I'm an ally to my transgender sister and brothers of color. You see what I'm saying? Ally can be defined about who you are in your day-to-day work and how you go about your business, but who you can become an ally to, literally person to person. But then when you collectivize that, that's a game changer. Literally a game changer. And I ask each one of us, you know, who has been looking at us and they might never come up to you and tell you, but they'll say, you have no idea. Just seeing you get around every day and you have a smile on your face and you're going about your business, that has given me more hope and a sense that things can change. And then they might tell you that a few years later, but you know what I mean? It's like the individual, the power of one of each person that can make a difference. That's what's keeping me going every day.
Okay, I just got another question in.
Oh.
What are the small, still hidden, implicit, and offensive things, for example, images, slogans, songs, phrases, etc., that need to be eradicated in society?
Oh, well, here's the other thing, let alone that decision, the Confederate flag. I could not believe it. I would say to you, when the state of Mississippi, which is probably holds that Confederate flag closer than anyone I can think of, and I'm not being disrespectful from anyone from there, but when you have the Confederate flag, NASCAR, basketball, football, where they're saying these have got to proactively come down. And Colin, who was the football player that essentially was, booed because he wanted to take a knee, and then all of a sudden the NFL. I mean, we're looking at these cultural shifts. They're almost like, I can't believe it. So the flag symbols, the flag, the monuments, some monuments coming down. Also, more importantly, what's going up in those spaces, whether it's a symbol or not. This is the 100th anniversary, by the way, of the women's right to vote this year. And August 25th is Equality Day. I hope you all are doing something on that day. But think about, women didn't have the right to vote, but 100 years. And what do we do with that collectively? And the same thing with people of color. But yes, symbols and you just think about more importantly, what are you putting up in place of if you're taking them down? And you hope that would be the case. Juneteenth probably got more attention than ever before because of what happened in Tulsa. But there's and I just want to make one observation. When I look at the crowds and I look around me, and you see such a variety of people, ages, where they're from, languages, we're in a moment. And I'm just sitting here feeling blessed enough that a lot of us are living it as it's happening. But I want to thank the ancestors before us and talk about where we are now and where we move forward. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. That's what I think is happening. And what a moment to be in. And I feel so thrilled that I get to be a part of your LGBTQ pride for our little conversation today. Good.
Okay, well, I guess I'm turning it back over to Nancy. Wendy, is that right?
I'm here. Yes. Thank you, Gina. And Mandy, we want to thank you so much from the state of North Carolina and on behalf of all the agencies and universities that participated today. It was delightful to share in your energy and enthusiasm and knowledge about the broad issue of the LGBT movement, its intersectionality with racial justice, topics that everyone is interested in. Please know that from the state of North Carolina, we have a firm commitment to achieving fairness and equality. Beyond the legal implications of that, also making people feel included. And so your comments today about the importance of that and the steps that just an individual can take to make that a reality are very pertinent. So again, we're very thankful that you were able to spare an hour today to talk with us. It was a very important and timely message. I will take the airway for just a minute to highlight another meeting that we're having tomorrow for our ER and EEO network at 3 o'clock tomorrow, a virtual meeting to talk about some broader questions. But at that meeting, we have Christine Ryan from our legal staff, and we will drill down into some of the tedium of this Supreme Court case, what this change to the interpretation of Title VII means for state government employees, for our policies and procedures, because there is the desire to be fair and to be equitable and to be inclusive, but then there's also the hard work that comes with pencil and paper and making that a structure and formalized process. So we will get into the specifics of the cases, how that impacts our policies, our grievance policy, employees that may have a complaint or concern related to these protected factors. So if you've not RSVP'd for that, we look forward to talking with you tomorrow in a more specific circumstance. But again, Mandy, thank you so much. It was delightful. We appreciate you taking the time and sharing your message. And thank you for responding to our invitation
Yes.
and being here with us today. I know Gina and Wendy have worked with you for the past few days to make sure that this goes off smoothly. So we appreciate your commitment to that. And we look forward to working with you in the future. And please don't be surprised if you get other agencies reaching out to you. We have a habit of sharing resources and contacts, so we look forward to working with you. Thank you
Thank
very
you so much. Okay.
Right. Wendy, anything as the host you'd like to say before we end this meeting today?
Yes, I would like to share that again, this meeting has been recorded, so you will be able to view this session in the future. We're going to post it online. And also, the PowerPoint that was presented today, it will also be shared after the meeting. And we will also have a listing of all of the websites that Mandy referred to. So if you have any other questions after today, please send either myself or Gina an email, and we'll be sure to get back in contact with you. But we will be sending out information as far as the PowerPoint was concerned to everyone, and also other organizations that Mandy referred to. But I appreciate everyone taking the time to come out today and spend some time with Mandy. And again, it's just very important, as she stated, to be allies. We didn't talk about it, but this a part of the LGBTQ alphabet soup, and ally is usually at the end. So consider yourself an ally and join in with Beyond Pride Month in celebrating the contributions of LGBTQ members of society. And we are all in our own, within ourselves, activists. So decide what you're going to fight for and decide what you're going to stand up for, but continue to be an ally. And at this time, I would like to conclude the meeting and have a good day.
Thank you. Yeah.